Hi everyone, welcome to a Microsoft Graph Toolkit session. My name is Aisha Bush and I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, focusing on Microsoft Graph, Teams, and Azure development. Today we are going to discover Microsoft Graph Toolkit, and we will have some demos with .NET and also a MSAL and proxy provider. If you want to learn more about Microsoft Graph Toolkit, and if you're interested about reading more about the Microsoft Graph scenarios, you can follow me on Twitter and we can stay connected there. Let's start. What is Microsoft Graph Toolkit? Microsoft Graph Toolkit is a collection of framework-agnostic web components powered by Microsoft Graph. Basically, all these components work automatically with Microsoft Graph, so we don't need any additional customization, or we don't need any other code or calling API written. We just call the components in our code, in our web application, our Teams application, or SharePoint web component, and these components work fine without any other touch. And as well as these components work with any web framework, in this case, you don't need to change your web framework. If you're Angular React developer, you can continue using the same framework and you can use components. If you are a .NET developer, still you can consume these components. There is no limitation around that. And the last thing is these components work on all modern browsers, so you don't need to worry about the browser selection because they're all compatible in all of the modern browsers. Who is it for? Microsoft Graph Toolkit is for any developer building a web application, or if you're interested in building Teams tabs or SharePoint web parts, then Microsoft Graph Toolkit will be the great solution for you to consume Microsoft Graph in a quick way. Why it is really nice to use it? Because first of all, instead of writing a huge amount of code for the authentication or calling the APIs, with a couple of lines of code, we can implement all Microsoft Graph capabilities. And these UI components are quite flexible. They work basically anywhere in any web framework and any modern browser. So basically it saves lots of time for a developer, and it's open source. If you want to contribute, all of the Graph Toolkit team is working on GitHub, so you can contribute to the Graph Toolkit improvement too. If you want to start today, you can visit Graph Toolkit documentation. There's a get started part where you can build a basic HTML file, and in the HTML you can try some of the components and see how they're working, and so on. And today we're going to try that too. Actually, before I start with my demo, I'm just going to show you the documentation, so you can go ahead and do exactly the same thing I'm doing right now by just copying and pasting from the Get Start documentation. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to open a browser to show you what is in Microsoft Graph Toolkit. I'll go to ak.ms/the-toolkit, and here you will see Graph Toolkit overview, all of the components and providers. If you go to Get Started part, you will see how you need to consume this in HTML file. How does it work with the providers in the SharePoint? Or if you're a React Angular lover, then you can use React and Angular solutions examples here, and you can try all these in your own example. Today, we're going to write a simple HTML. We will start with a simple HTML, then we will continue with .NET Core example. But first, let's try to see how these components look like in an HTML, basic HTML file. I open my Visual Studio Code. Then I'll create a new folder in the HTML, new folder, let's say mgt HTML demo. Then I'll create a HTML file inside index.html. Here, if you click Control space, it's going to give you HTML sample, and I'll use this one. And first thing first, I'm going to call my mgt loader. That's going to bring all of my mgt components. So I'll type script, and my script source is going to be https unpkg.com at Microsoft mgt this bundle mgt loader. You don't need to remember this entire thing. If you go to the get started part, you can just copy paste this from the documentation. The next thing I'm going to add is mgt msol provider. With this, I will be able to create the entire authentication flow in my HTML. For this, I will need an Azure Active Directory registered application and the application ID for application ID of my registered app. So I'm adding client ID for now, but we need to add our ID here. Then the last thing is I will add mgt login. This is the component we're going to use, mgt login, for logging in. For now, since we don't have the application ID, we will just, I'm assuming we will see a button. After we add our client ID, then the entire authentication flow should work fine. I'll use live server for testing my app. And I'll open my browser. Let me bring it here. Localhost 300, and there you go. We have our button. It's not clickable yet because we don't have our app registered in Azure Active Directory and we don't have the client ID, but once we have it, I'm assuming it should work fine. So I will go to Azure portal, portal.azure.com. Then I'm gonna log in with my demo tenant. So now I need to register an application in Azure Active Directory. So I'll go to Azure Active Directory. Next, I'll go to app registrations and new registration. You can call your app with any name. I will say mgt HTML, and here we have a couple of options for the access of the API. The first option is single tenant, which means only your directory, people in your organization can use this application. Second one is multi-tenant, which means only organizational directory accounts can use this application. Third one allows organizational directory accounts as well as the personal Microsoft accounts like Hotmail, Live, and so on. I'm going to choose the last one. I'll let everyone consume this application, and the redirect URI is going to be this, actually, 3000. So make sure this is web, and then we will register. So before we forget, one last thing, we need to go to authentication and we need to give enable implicit grant, because our app is going to use access tokens and ID tokens too. And the last thing, oops, I need to save it. And the last thing, we should go to overview, and get our application client ID. I copy this, then I go to my index.html and paste my client ID here, save it. I turn back to my localhost. I'm just refreshing. When I click sign in, I'm expecting to have a login, MSAL login, because we implemented the MSAL provider already. Now our application is working, mgt.html. It's asking me to read my profile for now. I consent on behalf of my organization, accept it. Once I accept it, since app can read my profile, I can see my name. This is the admin of my demo tenant, so you see mod administrator. But here, when I click it, I'm seeing a profile card where if I have an image, I can see my image here, as well as I can see my name, email, and if you want to customize this, you can add something more. So let's try to see some other stuff. For example, mgt agenda. If I add mgt agenda and save it, let's see what's going to happen. Now my app is asking more permissions, such as read the calendars. So it's going to read my calendar, and if something is available in my calendar, yeah, so I have some stuff in my calendar, and it now wants to read relevant people list, because whoever is in the same meeting, it will appear under the calendar event. I will accept this too. Now, as you see, so one more. User basic profile. So when I hover over user information, I will be able to see this user's information too. So this is super straightforward and easy. I think it is like in a couple of minutes, by writing one single HTML, we get the entire MSAL login, as well as we get the login button and we get the agenda. So all of them just took a couple of minutes for me. Let's continue. Okay, so we just tried login and agenda components, but of course there are more. These are the listed components for now. We have tasks, people, person, and we have people picker, person card, teams, channel picker, and get. Get is usually, so if the Graph API you would like to consume is not available in this components list, then you can go ahead and consume get. Get is available to consume any Graph API, and you can basically get any graph data you want by using get. We're going to do one email example with that too. But before moving forward with the demo, I just want to share with you that Microsoft Graph Toolkit is a great playground where you can go and check what is available. You can also test what you want to build in the playground, and you can see all the capabilities. For example, if you want to add other CSS or JS functionalities in your component, you can try out here before jumping into a web application and building everything from there. This is a great place to learn Microsoft Graph Toolkit, as well as there's also documentation available regarding each and every component. I want to quickly show you what is available in Playground. I'll go to mgt.dev. And here I am, Microsoft Graph Toolkit Playground. So this is a great solution and very nice place to learn from scratch. I will zoom in a little. So we start with agenda. Let's say this is a simple one we just used in our first demo, but if you want to get everything by date, you can actually add group by day, and you can put a start date, and you can see here we can say that we just want to get 3 days in the calendar, and it will just organize everything accordingly. So these attributes are available for all components. If you want to, for example, customize people, let's say we have show max 5. If I change this to 7, probably this is just gonna change the number of people showing on the screen. If we give a group ID, then it should show people in the same in this group. For example, people picker, we also have group ID. You can just select people from that group. This is a really nice place to learn and play around with Microsoft Graph Toolkit. I was just talking about this get component. Get component is available here for any graph API. Let's say that none of these components are useful for you and you want to call some other graph API and show something else on the screen, then simply you can show the resource here. In this case, it's all messages in the Outlook. With the template, I'm going to talk about templates too. In the template, as you can see, we just get all emails from the person's mailbox, and we can list it here. There are some other samples here too, if you want to check out. Other than that, what I really like about the playground is in any component, let's say I'm checking out MGT agenda. If you go to docs, you can see all of the related documentation with MGT agenda. You can basically see attributes you can use in MGT agenda. You can see the properties, all of the events, and the CSS if you want to customize anything. If you want to customize MGT agenda component, there are some stories like some scenarios, get by event query, get by date. These are the samples to give you an idea, but you can use all of the attributes and find out the best one for yourself. This documentation is available for each and every component. Let's say I go to MGT people. Again, in MGT people, you can see all attributes, properties, stories available here. And last but not least, in the samples, we have some templating. These are, again, just samples for us, but if you're interested in building one for yourself, you can also build something from scratch. Okay, let's turn back to the presentation. Let's talk about custom attributes, properties, and CSS. If you're interested in customizing the component for yourself, then we have, as I showed you earlier, we have attributes, properties, and CSS to customize it. Basically, if you want to select anything, or if you want to change the height, width, as well as you can change the font size, and basically all of the generic HTML attributes and CSS components are available for each and every component in Graph Toolkit. Templating. So templating is the really nice one we generally use quite a lot. If you want to build one component, let's say if you want to create one thing and you want to consume the same thing in different places in your application, templating is a really nice option. We can create one template and reuse the same template again and again. In this example, for example, we are getting person's email name and the person's image. And if I want to reuse this template again somewhere else in my web application, I can just call my template. And we have data context helper too. So here we have index and the parent. If you want to call something in your application HTML, then you can just use again index and parent. It's available for Graph Toolkit components too. One other thing is conditional rendering. It's available for Graph Toolkit. Let's say you just want to check if person has an image. If yes, then you can show. If not, then you can just show the initials of the person. And of course, we have looping too, data for if you want to display multiple names instead of writing all of them one by one, you can just use data for. And last but not least, mgt.get. It's a quite useful one. If you want to consume any Microsoft Graph API, you can just change the resource and you can call resource any handle of Microsoft Graph. You define version and you should just define the scope. Let's say you want to get all files from Microsoft Graph, or let's say you want to get trending insights around you. As you know, Microsoft Graph has more than 5,000 APIs and not all of them has the component yet. But what you can do is just consume my mgt.get and you can literally get whichever data you want from M365. And another important part is providers. As you know, Microsoft Graph Toolkit has providers for us to enable authentication and get necessary tokens for calling Graph. We just use MSAL provider in HTML file, but we also have Teams, SharePoint, proxy, and custom providers available. If you want to consume Microsoft Graph Toolkit in Teams, then you can use Teams provider. If you want to build SharePoint web components, then you can use SharePoint provider. Today, we're going to discover MSAL provider in .NET Core app, as well as I just want to show you how to consume proxy. Let's say you already have your authentication layer in your web application, how you can, without breaking anything, without using mgt login, how can we consume other components in Microsoft Graph Toolkit, and you continue using your own authentication layer. We're just going to discover that. And if you want to build your own provider, you can use custom providers and basically build your own to consume Microsoft Graph Toolkit components. Okay, so first of all, we will try to build .NET Core application and we will consume MSAL provider, and then we will use all of the components. The second example we will try today is a proxy provider, where your application has a authentication already, has authentication layer in your structure already. But you just want to consume components, like you want to get the calendar instead of writing another piece of code. You just want to call it, call the components from HTML, and it will be there. And that's why proxy provider is quite important for us. So let's start with the first one. I'm going to open my terminal. Then I'll go to my desktop. I'll create a new folder, .NET MSAL demo, and I'll go in my folder. Then I'll create new .NET application, .NET new MVC. This is going to create my new application. Okay, so now I can open it from code. I'll go and find the folder I created .NET mcell demo. Oops. Select folder. Now, before we move forward, I just want to explain that this application is a .NET Core 3.1. It comes with all of the controllers and the views. So if we run the app without adding anything, I just want to show you that how it looks like before we add anything. I just open my terminal in Visual Studio Code and write .NET run to see how it looks like in an empty version. Localhost 5001 is the place for us, and this is our app. So now what I'm planning to do is under this welcome, I'm going to add login component with mcell provider. Then once we have all of the authentication and we get the token, we're going to add calendar, tasks, and emails. So basically, we are creating a web application as a one productivity hub. So you can go ahead and check all of your emails, tasks, calendar for the day and for the week and so on. So this is our main purpose. So I'm going to stop this for a while, and I'll go to Views, Home, Index CSS/HTML. So under Welcome, I'm just going to go ahead and add my mcell loader. So this is exactly the same with the example we did, the HTML example we did. We're going to first add our mgt loader. Second, we are going to add mcell provider. And the third, we will add mgt login. I'll write script, and the source of my script is https unpkg.com Microsoft mgt dist bundle mgt loader.js. Better to copy paste. There's a high chance that I wrote it wrong. Second, I'm gonna add mgt mcell provider. Here, as you know, we need client ID. And we're going to create our application under Azure Active Directory. Then we will add our app ID under client ID. And the next, we have mgt login. So if you run now, as you know, we will see login button, but there will be when we click it, there will be nothing happening basically. And once we have our app ID here, then mcell provider will work for the authentication and we get the token. I just want to run the solution just to see how it looks like for now. And after that, we can go to Azure portal and create our application under Azure Active Directory. Localhost 5001, and here we go. We have sign in button. It's not clickable yet. For that, we will go to portal.azure.com. I zoomed in already. I will log in with my demo tenant, and here I can go to Azure Active Directory, app registrations, and new registration. I'm going to say mcell.net demo. You know how this works. I will zoom in a little bit. You know how this works. I'm going to choose the last one for the accounts in any organizational directory, as well as the personal Microsoft accounts. And the redirect URI, as you know, is going to be our local host. For me, it's 5001. I register. Next steps, as you know, we will go to authentication. Under authentication, we implicit Enable implicit grant by clicking access tokens and ID tokens, save. And the last part for us is getting client ID. I copy our client ID, turn back to my app, paste it here, save it, and run my app. It's here. Now it is asking to read my profile. I consent and accept. Then I should be able to see my name here with my picture. When I click, it should show me my email address, and if you want, you can sign out. Okay, now our basic structure is ready. Next, we are just gonna create good looking dashboard, let's say not dashboard, but one row with 3 columns, and each column will have one component like tasks, calendar, and emails. I'll turn back to my app, and next I'm going to, let's first stop the app. Next, I'm going to add a 1 row and 3 columns here. I have that prepared already. I pasted it here. So basically, this is going to generate 1 row and 3 columns. Under each column, I'm going to add my components. Before we move forward with the components, I just want to add a CSS file under my site CSS just to make it prettier. I go to root CSS, site CSS. I have my CSS file ready. Paste it here. I saved it. Then I turn back to my index CSS.html. Now I can start adding my components. What I'm going to do is, let's start with the basics. I'm going to add MGT agenda in the first one. And let's run it just to see how it looks like. .NET run. I go to my localhost. Now it's going to ask me to reach out my calendar, so it will show my calendar events. Next, it should ask me my contacts, the relevant people list, because it will also demonstrate the people who are invited on those events underneath. And next, it should ask me if we can read people's basic profiles. So once we hover over that person, we can see details of that person too, like this, for example. Yeah, so now we have the calendar. Next, I can add tasks in my emails, and we will be done. So in the second column, before we move forward, let's group this by the day, so we can see the agenda by the day, which day, and we're just going to have day as a title and the events underneath. Second column, I'm going to add MGT tasks. Let's see that too. And we can check group by day too. Yeah. Now it is asking me to read all groups. I accept it. As you see, we have days and events. If I had more days, I would see it, but I don't have any more days. These are the tasks and people. Yeah, the last part is getting the emails. As you know, to be able to get emails, I already show in the mgt.dev, we can use mgt.get and we can create template for getting the emails. We're going to use mgt.get sample here. It is available in mgt.dev. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste mgt.get for now. As we discussed before, mgt.get can call any graph API, and you can get the values or actually whichever parameter you require. And now I'm going to run my app and expecting to see 3 columns. Okay, now it's asking me to read the emails. Okay, there we go. So it is one more thing, read my contacts. So it's going to show me who is in that email, who sent the email. I can zoom in a little bit more. So this is my one hub. I have my calendars, my tasks, as well as I have my emails. I can also group my emails by day. You can play around a bit more with the CSS, with JavaScript, like you can do lots of things here. This is the basic one we just did in a couple of minutes. You can improve this and make it better, of course. This solution can also be run in a React app, as an Angular app. For this demo, we use .NET Core, but these same components can be used in any other web framework. Okay, so this was the example of MSAL provider. As you remember, we use MSAL provider. What I'm going to show next is using proxy provider, Microsoft Graph Toolkit proxy provider, for the ones who already have authentication layer in their app. So they don't want to use MGT login as an authentication, but they want to consume some of the components. How can we do that? By having our own authentication and getting the token, but still being able to consume our components. So I actually get a very nice example from my colleague Beth. So I'm just going to follow her way. What I will do is, first I'm going to open a browser and I'm going to get the .NET Core sample for me. I will go to, let me zoom in a little bit. I will go to aka.ms/m-graph. This is going to direct me to Microsoft Graph documentation. Here you see there are tutorials. What I did was I just came here and get ASP.NET Core sample, and I just downloaded it and I used for the sake of the example. So I'm just going to open the solution. I use exactly the same example. The only thing I did is adding proxy controller. In proxy controller, you can actually call to get the token. I'm assuming that you have the proxy controller already or something like this to get the token and call whichever way you want. We just have, we're just processing the request here by get, put, post, and so on. And we are getting the token, but not the way we usually get with a login component, but the way that you prefer to do it. So let's say that you have this proxy controller already, and you still want to use MGT components. what we can do is under the layout, I just added this piece of code. You are aware of this part already. This is our mgt loader script. And after that, we will add our proxy provider. We are going to call mgt providers global provider, and we are going to call our proxy provider. After that, let's say that we get the token from your authentication, and in index.html, we're just gonna call the method you prefer. I'm assuming this get user graph display name method is coming from your application, and we can call mgt person from here. Basically, you're able to call your own methods from mgt person to see everything in your app, and you can call mgt agenda thanks to proxy provider. I'm just going to go ahead and run the application so it will give you more information about what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm not in the app. cd demo graph tutorial and .NET run. Okay, I go to my localhost. I will log in with my admin. So it is getting everything from scratch, but I can try to show you in the private window how it looks like and how we get the token from your account. It's asking me from scratch to sign in. Anyways, I signed in. Okay, so here we have a sign in button. We have no control of it. And we are getting the token with a proxy controller. So it is not using local, it's not using an MGT login or MCell provider, but token will be get by the way you prefer. After that, once we get the token, we are calling the Graph API, Graph Toolkit, and we get all of the required data. Here, you're just calling in the profile, you're calling your own method, and you get the person information. And after that, you can call the agenda. So by using the same token, you can get related view for the agenda as well. And the rest is exactly the same. You can, again, group by day. Nothing is different. You can add some other you can add some other components to MGT tasks, for example, and so on. So you can consume this in more and more once you have your provider implemented here, proxy provider. Once we have our provider, then you can basically change your page however you want. I'm going to run this once more. So 3 things we have done. I added proxy controller. I'm assuming that you have that already. After this, under the layout, we add our script for MGT loader, as well as we call our proxy provider. And the last thing we did is just changing the view of index.html and adding our components. So I added one more component, and I expect to, oops, not this one. Let me close and open it in the private window. So now I have my profile. We group the calendar by day. And the last part is my tasks. Of course, you can put better view with CSS and some JavaScript. It will look much better, but actually you can directly consume your components from Microsoft Graph Toolkit by still continue using your own authentication layer. So you don't need to use login component to be able to use other components in MGT. So that was all what I was going to show today. And let's not forget the last slide. It's everything related with MGT. If you are interested in playing around with MGT and creating some different CSS, trying to get other graph data by using mgt.get and so on, mgt.dev is the great place to visit, the Microsoft Toolkit playground. And the second thing I really highly want to mention is that there is a great blog series which has 15 posts, and these posts are covering all of the components, providers, and there are great examples. If you want to check that out, if you want to see React Angular samples too, you can go to ak.ms/mgt-lab. If you are interested in checking out official documentation of Microsoft Graph Toolkit, you can go to ak.ms/g-toolkit. And you can get all of the samples from the repository ak.ms/mgt. If you have any questions, you can go to Stack Overflow. And if you want to check out what's going to come next related with Microsoft Graph Toolkit, the product team's roadmap is open, and you can always check out the roadmap by going to ak.ms/mgt-roadmap. With that, I'd like to thank everyone watching this video, and I hope you find it useful. If you have any questions, you can always go to Stack Overflow, or you can always communicate me through Twitter to ask your questions. Have a great day.